A mother's plea for connection, the battle between duty and devotion in the delivery room. In the dim glow of the hospital room, shadows stretched across the walls as she gripped the edge of the bed. Her breaths were slow, deliberate, grounding her in the overwhelming reality that she was about to become a mother. But as she glanced over at her husband, her heart sank. He wasn't there beside her, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. Instead, he stood at the foot of the bed, looking every bit the dedicated doctor, ready to deliver their child. From the beginning of their relationship, she had admired his dedication to his work. His passion for medicine was one of the things that had drawn her to him. But tonight, as she faced the terrifying unknown of childbirth, she didn't want a doctor. She wanted her husband. She wanted the man who had held her through late-night fears, who had laughed with her about baby names, and who had promised to be there every step of the way. She took a deep breath, trying to suppress the swell of emotions. She knew his desire to deliver their baby was a dream of his, a personal goal he had held for as long as he could remember. But her heart ached for the closeness she had envisioned. She had imagined his hand wrapped around hers, grounding her, comforting her through every moment. How could she make him see that this wasn't about denying him a dream but about fulfilling hers? As the tension grew between them, her mind drifted back to moments in their relationship that foreshadowed this sense of isolation she was now feeling. She had always been fiercely independent, shaped by a childhood marked by challenges. Growing up, she'd had to rely on herself in ways most people couldn't understand. By the time she met him, she had already faced life on her own terms, supporting herself through school, working multiple jobs, and handling every crisis alone. But when she met him, for the first time, she thought she'd found someone who could be her partner in life. Someone to lean on. He was her first experience of true companionship, her first glimpse of what it felt like to have someone who cared deeply. Someone who would be there when things got hard. And he did care. He showed it in ways that were uniquely his. Often quiet, sometimes subtle, but always present. But now, as she sat on the precipice of becoming a mother, she realized that she needed more. She needed his presence, not as a medical professional but as her partner, standing by her side and grounding her through each wave of pain and fear. In the weeks leading up to her due date, she had tried to communicate this need to him. She remembered one particular evening after dinner when they'd sat on the couch together. And she had broached the topic gently, hoping to make him understand. She described the way she pictured their child's birth. She would be lying on the bed, his hand in hers, their eyes meeting as they awaited their baby's first cry. She even confessed how nervous she was, how much she feared the pain and the unknown, hoping he would see her vulnerability. But his response was practical, almost clinical. He assured her that she'd be fine, that she was strong and would handle it just as she handled everything in life. He dismissed her fears, even chuckled softly and said she'd laugh about this in a few months. In that moment, she had tried to brush it off, but it hurt. She realized that he saw this experience entirely differently. For him, this was a professional milestone, a chance to use his skills to deliver his own child. But for her, it was a moment of transformation, one she had dreamed of sharing with him in a profoundly personal way. In the days that followed, she brought it up again, trying to find new words, a different way to help him understand. She told him about her dreams as a little girl, lying under the stars in her small hometown, imagining one day having a family of her own, feeling loved and supported. She wanted him to know that she wasn't asking him to give up his dream lightly. But each time she spoke, his responses were the same. He saw no reason why he couldn't be both her husband and the doctor delivering their baby. To him, it was the ultimate blend of his roles. But she saw it differently. She felt that by stepping into his role as a doctor, he would be stepping away from her as her husband at the moment she needed him most. And as the months passed, her resentment began to grow. The closer she got to her due date, the more anxious she felt. She started to withdraw, wondering if her request was unreasonable. Doubting her own needs, she confided in a close friend, who had her own story to share about her husband's reaction to her own childbirth experience. Her friend explained how her husband had been by her side, holding her hand and comforting her, that it had created a bond between them that grew stronger with every contraction. Hearing that story only deepened her own sense of loss, the feeling that she was somehow missing out on a cherished memory. Still, she tried once more to explain her feelings to him. I want to remember this as a moment for us. She told him, her voice trembling. Not as your patient but as your wife. I don't want to look back and remember feeling like just another body on a hospital bed. His response was sympathetic but unchanged. He was convinced that this was a decision for the best. You're strong enough to do this, he said, reaching out to touch her arm. And I'll be there. Just, not in the way you might think. This will be something we'll both be proud of. As the due date approached, she began to feel a growing sense of loneliness. She watched him preparing, discussing the birth plan with his colleagues, even rehearsing the logistics of his role. Her voice seemed to fade into the background. She felt as though she were merely an observer in her own story. More than ever, she longed to be seen as his equal in this experience, to face the birth of their child as a team, as two people stepping into parenthood together. The night before she went into labor, she lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything in her mind. She had always prided herself on being resilient, on not needing anyone, but in that moment, she felt like a young girl again, wishing for someone to be there for her in her time of need. She felt guilty for wanting this, guilty for feeling as though her needs conflicted with his dreams. But more than that, she felt a quiet ache, a longing that words couldn't seem to capture. When labor began, she still held out hope that he might change his mind. As each contraction swept over her, she looked up at him, hoping to see that recognition in his eyes, that understanding of her need. But he was focused, composed, moving with the practiced ease of a doctor, not the trembling heart of a father-to-be. And as he prepared to take his position, she felt a deep sense of abandonment. In that moment, she realized that he would never fully understand what she was asking for. As the contractions intensified, she squeezed her eyes shut, trying to brace herself against the pain. Each wave was like a force beyond her control, a storm surging within her, and all she wanted was his hand, his touch, his comforting words. But when she opened her eyes, he was already by the foot of the bed, preparing to step into his role as doctor. The room was full of bustling professionals, each one moving with a sense of purpose, each one focusing on the task at hand. Yet to her, it all felt distant, removed from the deeply personal, almost sacred experience she had imagined. She tried to focus on her breathing, on grounding herself, but her mind kept drifting to him, wishing he'd come over, even for a moment, and be the husband she needed. She felt like she was slipping away, like she was invisible, and it broke something inside her. The pivotal moment arrived, and she watched through blurred vision as he took his place, ready to deliver their child. Her heart ached as he leaned forward, his eyes focused and steady, his hands outstretched to guide their baby into the world. She wanted to be happy for him, wanted to understand the pride he felt, but all she felt was an emptiness, a hollow realization that he was here in body but not in spirit. She was alone in the most vulnerable moment of her life. And then, with a final push, their baby arrived. She heard the cries, felt the rush of relief and exhaustion, but she was too drained, too hurt, to fully experience the joy. She watched as he held their child for the first time, a look of pride and love washing over his face. She wanted to reach out, to share in that moment with him, but the invisible wall between them felt too thick, too permanent. They handed her the baby moments later, and as she held the small, fragile life in her arms, she felt a mixture of emotions, overwhelming love, relief, and, lingering beneath it all, a quiet sadness. She had imagined this moment so differently. She had pictured him by her side, the two of them gazing down at their child together, lost in the wonder of it all. But instead, he was still the doctor, still separate, and the bond she had hoped for felt fractured. In the days that followed, she tried to process her emotions. She wanted to understand why this experience had left her feeling so distant from him, why her need for connection had felt so unmet. And slowly, she came to realize that it wasn't just about this one moment in the delivery room. It was about a deeper need for partnership, for a sense of mutual vulnerability that had been missing. She had a conversation with him a few nights after they returned home, their newborn sleeping peacefully in her bassinet nearby. She told him, gently but honestly, how she had felt during the birth, how lonely and unseen she had been. She shared with him her need for him to be her partner, not just a provider or protector, but someone who would stand with her, who would be present with her in every sense. At first, he was defensive, struggling to understand why she felt this way. "I was there, wasn't I?" he said, his voice filled with confusion. "I delivered our baby. I thought that's what you wanted." But as she continued to open up, sharing stories from her past, her childhood, the times she had to face the world alone, he began to see it. He saw the years of self-reliance that had worn her down. The quiet longing she had always carried for someone who would truly be there for her. He began to understand that this experience was about more than the physical presence. It was about an emotional connection that she needed. A sense of togetherness that they had yet to fully build. Over the next few weeks, they worked on their relationship, finding small ways to reconnect, to bridge the gap that had formed between them. He began to show up for her in ways he hadn't before. Not just as a husband or a father but as a partner. He started to listen more, to be present with her in the little moments, understanding that his role in her life went beyond what he had previously thought. And as they grew into their roles as parents, they found a new rhythm together, a deeper level of trust and respect that had been missing before. He began to see her not just as his wife or the mother of his child, but as a woman who had her own journey, her own battles, and her own needs. And she, in turn, began to see him not just as a doctor or a provider but as someone who was willing to learn, to grow, and to be the partner she had always needed. In the end, the experience became a turning point in their relationship, a lesson in the importance of empathy, of truly listening to one another's needs. Even when they didn't fully understand them, she realized that love wasn't just about being there physically, it was about being present emotionally. About showing up in the ways that mattered most. Their journey wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of tension. Times when he slipped back into his role as a doctor or when she struggled with her own need for independence. But they had found a new understanding, a deeper level of connection that would carry them through the challenges of parenthood and beyond. And as she looked back on that moment in the delivery room, she no longer felt the same sadness. Instead, she saw it as a pivotal moment, a chance for them to grow, to become stronger together. She had learned the power of speaking her truth, of asking for what she needed, even when it was hard. And he had learned that love sometimes meant setting aside one's own dreams to be there for the people who mattered most. The midnight visitor, a mystery from the past, haunts my family. On a quiet, ordinary night, a disturbance shattered the peace that had always defined my family's home. I'd recently moved to a new apartment, a place where I was still unpacking boxes and gradually arranging my life into a new rhythm. My parents, living just 20 minutes away, were the ones I relied on to receive my mail as I settled in. Their home was a comforting constant, the same place I'd grown up, where memories felt as secure as the familiar walls. Little did I know that a piece of my past, one I thought was long buried, would come knocking, quite literally, on their door. This strange, unnerving tale begins at 1 a.m., a time when most people are tucked away in bed, lost in dreams. My parents were no exception. They had been fast asleep when the frantic, insistent banging began on their front door. The loud, repetitive thudding combined with the sharp ring of the doorbell jolted them awake. Both of them startled and momentarily disoriented. My stepdad, always cautious, went downstairs with his heart pounding, each step toward the front door echoing through the house's silence. He turned on the porch light, hoping to catch a glimpse of who could be causing such a ruckus at such an ungodly hour. As he peered through the front door's glass, he saw a man standing outside. This man was an unfamiliar figure, cloaked in a black hoodie with the hood pulled tightly over his head, obscuring most of his face. My stepdad's first instinct was to keep the door closed, using the glass barrier to maintain a semblance of security while he assessed the situation. In the dim porch light, the man's face was hard to make out, but he appeared to be in his early 30s, with no distinctive features, no facial hair, no tattoos, nothing that would make him stand out. The only thing that seemed noteworthy, according to my stepdad, was that the man looked vaguely Hispanic. As my mom stood by the window, watching the encounter with growing unease, the man spoke, his voice muffled through the glass. "I'm sorry to bother you," he began, his tone oddly polite for someone showing up in the middle of the night. "But I'm looking for my full name." He said my name with an unsettling familiarity, the syllables rolling off his tongue as if he'd practiced them, as if he knew me. My stepdad, trying to remain calm, replied with a vague response, feigning ignorance. "Who?" he asked, as though he hadn't heard correctly. hoping perhaps that this was all some sort of misunderstanding. But the man persisted, repeating my full name with unwavering certainty. Then, as if that weren't strange enough, he added a detail that sent a chill down my parents' spines. He claimed that my boyfriend was worried about me, that I hadn't come home that night, and that he was here as a friend to make sure I was safe. This statement was confusing on multiple levels. For one, I was very much single and hadn't been in a relationship for nearly 6 months. I lived alone, with my 3 dogs as my only companions. There was no boyfriend in my life who might have been concerned about my whereabouts. Yet here was this stranger, adamantly insisting that he was looking out for me on behalf of a boyfriend. The whole thing felt wrong, as though he was reciting lines from a poorly written play. As my stepdad tried to process this information, he asked the man which boyfriend he was referring to, hoping to glean more insight into the bizarre situation. What came next was perhaps the most baffling detail of all. The man gave the name of a boy I had dated in high school. A boyfriend from my sophomore year. Nearly 2 decades ago. This wasn't just any name, either. It was a unique Italian name, one I hadn't thought about in years, and one I'd never encountered elsewhere. My high school boyfriend's name was distinct, something that anyone who knew it would remember. Hearing this name from the stranger's mouth felt surreal, almost like a forgotten ghost had been conjured back to life. My stepdad, now thoroughly alarmed, decided to end the interaction. He closed the door firmly and locked it, telling the man that no one by my name was inside the house. But the man didn't leave. He lingered on the front porch, smoking a cigarette and talking on his phone as though he had all the time in the world. My parents watched him from inside, each passing minute heightening their anxiety. After 10 minutes of this tense standoff, my parents decided they'd had enough. They called the police, reporting the suspicious visitor who had shown up unannounced in the middle of the night. 5 minutes before the police arrived, the man finally walked away, disappearing into the darkness at the end of the block. My stepdad noted that he drove off in a silver car but wasn't able to catch the license plate. Once the police arrived, they took my parents' statements and filed a report. But with no further information, there wasn't much they could do. The next morning, I received a call from my parents, who recounted the entire incident in detail. Listening to their story left me feeling unsettled and strangely violated, as though a part of my past had intruded into my present life without warning. The details didn't make sense: the man's claim of a boyfriend, the use of my high school ex's name, the timing of the visit at 1 a.m. All of it felt like a puzzle with missing pieces. As I sat with these unsettling details, my mind began to race with questions. Who could this man be? And why was he dredging up memories from a relationship that had ended almost 2 decades ago? My high school boyfriend and I had lost touch shortly after graduation, and our parting wasn't exactly amicable. I'd broken up with him in a rather abrupt way, choosing someone else over him in a decision that, looking back, was admittedly harsh. At the time, he hadn't taken it well, and the aftermath had left a bad taste, with him occasionally crossing boundaries in ways that made me uncomfortable. Over the years, I'd rarely thought about him, dismissing those memories as mere remnants of my teenage years. But now, the mention of his name in such a strange context made me wonder if he might somehow be involved. Could he still hold a grudge? And if so, why would he choose this roundabout way to make his presence known? The questions spiraled in my mind, each one more troubling than the last. I decided to reach out to him, albeit reluctantly. Finding him on social media was surprisingly easy. He hadn't changed much in appearance, and his profile was public. I sent him a brief message, recounting the incident without accusing him of anything outright. His response was quick and, on the surface, sincere. He expressed genuine surprise, claiming to have no idea who the man at my parents' house could have been. He even apologized for any distress the situation had caused, assuring me that he was happily married and had moved on from our past relationship long ago. While his words were comforting on some level, they didn't entirely dispel my unease. There was something about his response that felt rehearsed, as though he'd anticipated the possibility of my reaching out. I chose to believe him for the moment, but a lingering doubt remained, a shadow in the back of my mind that refused to let go. Days turned into weeks, and life began to settle back into its usual rhythm. I visited my parents' house often, each time half expecting to see the silver car parked nearby, but the stranger never returned. Just as I was beginning to let my guard down, thinking that perhaps the incident had been a one-time fluke, I heard from my stepsister about a bizarre encounter she'd had at a recent party. My stepsister and her fiancé had been attending a casual gathering when they struck up a conversation with a woman neither of them knew. As they chatted, the woman began to talk about her recent breakup with her ex-boyfriend, a man she described as having a very unique Italian name. My stepsister's ears perked up, recognizing the name as the same one the stranger had mentioned that night at my parents' house. She and her fiancé exchanged glances, each realizing that this was no ordinary coincidence. Curious, they asked the woman more about her ex, without revealing too many details of our family's recent ordeal. As they shared bits of their own experiences, the woman's face went pale. She hesitated before confiding that she, too, had experienced a late-night visitor. Just a few nights after her breakup, someone had shown up at her door, banging loudly and demanding to see her. The encounter had left her shaken, and though she hadn't called the police, she'd taken to staying with friends out of fear of another visit. The parallels between her story and mine were uncanny. We shared the same ex-boyfriend from years ago, and now, both of us had been visited by a mysterious stranger at 1 a.m., each encounter filled with unexplained details and lingering fear. The stranger's motives remained elusive, an enigma wrapped in memories of a past neither of us had thought would resurface in such a haunting way. As the weeks passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger's visits were somehow connected to unresolved emotions from that long-ago relationship. Though I never received a definitive answer, the experience left me with a lesson I hadn't anticipated. The past has a way of creeping back into our lives, sometimes in ways that are as unsettling as they are inexplicable. Since that night, my family and I have taken measures to protect ourselves, installing security cameras and being more vigilant about who we let into our lives. The mystery of the midnight visitor remains unsolved, a chilling reminder that even the most ordinary lives can be touched by the unexplained.